Hey, tonight we're exploring why your memory is often wrong. You're lying still, and the air feels soft against your skin, the kind of stillness that makes you hear your own breathing. Around you, the night holds its breath, the way a quiet street does after the last shop closes. Somewhere in that darkness, in the gentle silence between heartbeats, your mind is holding on to 1,000 tiny fragments, half-lit faces, the smell of rain on a street you can't quite place, a sentence someone once said but whose voice you can't recall. They feel like yours. They feel permanent. But as you step closer to them, you notice they're not carved in stone. They're more like footprints in sand, edges softening, shapes changing, tiny grains shifting with each tide of thought. You probably won't survive this world unchanged, but that's the point. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you enjoy quiet stories like this. If you're still awake, post your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand in a long corridor that seems to have no end, its walls lined with doors you recognize but can't name. Each one is a memory, or what you think is a memory. When you reach for the nearest handle, the door swings open without a sound. Inside, you find yourself in a kitchen bathed in morning light. The smell of coffee lingers in the air. A voice hums somewhere behind you. It feels right, familiar, as if you've been here 100 times before. Yet something doesn't sit quite straight in the scene. The mug on the counter. It has a design you've never owned. The light through the window is coming from the wrong direction, as though the sun itself has taken liberties with your recollection. Scientists say that every time you recall a memory, your brain doesn't simply retrieve it like a file from a cabinet. Instead, it reconstructs it, piecing together fragments from different neural networks, filling gaps with plausible details. In this way, the memory you hold now is not the original event, but a version edited in the moment. You notice the floor beneath you feels smoother than you remember. The tiles have lost the faint crack near the door. Was it ever there? Or did your mind add it in some other remembering, perhaps years later? In 1974, researchers Elizabeth Loftus and John Palmer conducted a study in which people watched a film of a car accident. When asked how fast the cars were going when they smashed into each other, participants gave higher speed estimates than when the word hit was used. The single change of a verb altered their recollection and even led some to later remember broken glass that never existed. This is not a flaw in you alone. It is how all human memory works. The corridors of your mind are never fixed in stone. The paint dries slowly, and sometimes it never quite sets. You walk deeper into the kitchen and open a cabinet. Inside are mugs, plates, and a small box of tea. You feel the weight of the box in your hand, certain you remember buying it on a rainy afternoon. But the brand is unfamiliar, and the color of the packaging feels wrong. Maybe it was a sunny day. Maybe you never bought it at all. Your mind, in its gentle and constant editing, may have borrowed the tea from another memory. Perhaps a gift from someone else. Perhaps a detail from a film. You can't be certain anymore. And yet, there is something strangely comforting about this imperfection. It means your memories are alive, breathing, able to change with you. They are not fossils. They are gardens, growing in unpredictable ways, even if some of the blossoms are borrowed. Researchers still wonder if any memory remains perfectly untouched, or if, from the moment it forms, it begins to bend, stretch, and take on colors from everything else you've experienced. You step back from the cabinet, letting the box of tea rest in its place. The kitchen around you blurs slightly at the edges, as though it's fading back into whatever corner of your mind it came from. Down the corridor, another door waits. Its frame glows faintly, not with urgency, but with the slow pulse of something that has been waiting a long time to be seen again. You walk toward it, your footsteps muffled against the soft floor. You don't rush. In this place, there is no need. You stand before the glowing frame, and the faint hum of air feels warmer here. When you touch the handle, it's smooth, too smooth, as though countless versions of you have held it before, each one leaving no mark. The door opens into a dim, amber-lit space like an old photograph curled at the edges. This room feels like memory itself, aged but stubbornly alive. On the far wall hangs a portrait. At first glance, you know exactly who it is, the curve of the smile, the way the hair falls. But the longer you look, the more details begin to smudge. The eyes seem lighter than they should be. The shape of the chin shifts subtly, almost imperceptibly, as if the memory is retelling itself while you watch. Fading ink on the mind's page. That's what scientists sometimes call the process. The neurons that fire together when a memory forms will, over time, lose some of their connections. The image doesn't vanish all at once. It fades at the edges first, like paper left under the sun. You step closer to the portrait and realize you can't remember the day it was taken. You remember telling someone about it, describing the weather, the laughter. But the actual moment has slipped. It's like holding a page where the words have been washed into delicate swirls. In 1885, Hermann Ebbinghaus first described the forgetting curve, showing how memories fade rapidly after they are formed unless revisited. The first day, they are bright and sharp. By the next week, they are already ghosts in the making. Your mind tries to hold on, but it is also wired to let go. You run your fingers over the frame, and dust clings to your skin. But here's the thing. Dust itself is a kind of memory. Tiny particles of what once was still lingering in the air and settling where they're not noticed. You wonder how much of what you remember is just the dust of truth, clinging without the full shape of the moment. Somewhere in the room, there's the sound of paper turning. You follow it to a desk by the window. On the desk lies a notebook, open to a page covered in your handwriting. You read the first sentence and recognize the thought instantly. You've told it to people before, convinced it was your own. But now, seeing it in ink, you feel the creeping uncertainty. Did you write this or copy it from someone else long ago? Your mind is full of these palimpsests, layers of memory written over older layers, the past bleeding through where the ink has thinned, a name you can't place, a scent you know but can't source. The line between real and reconstructed blurs until it's not a line at all, but a slow gradient of fading ink. There is an unusual comfort here. If nothing can be remembered perfectly, perhaps nothing can be lost completely either. Maybe in some corner of your neural web, even the oldest and faintest memories still glow, waiting for a chance to be called forward, if only in fragments. Yet researchers still debate whether retrieving a memory strengthens it or alters it irreversibly. Each act of remembering might be both preservation and quiet corruption, like making a photocopy of a fading photo. You save it, but the grain changes, the edges soften. The amber light in the room grows dimmer. You glance back at the portrait, and the face is no longer someone you know for certain. It's only a feeling now, the warmth of recognition without the certainty of why. You step away from the desk, moving toward the window. Outside, the sky holds a dusky gradient. No sun, no stars, just that in-between glow that refuses to be named. And in that half light, you see another door across the courtyard, that's waiting like the next sentence of a story you haven't read yet. You turn toward it, carrying with you not the exact image of the portrait or the words in the notebook, but the sensation they left, as if the memory itself has become more about how it feels than what it shows. You cross the courtyard in that in-between glow, where the air feels thick but not heavy, and every sound carries a little farther than it should. The ground beneath your feet is patterned with faint cracks, each one winding like a vein toward the edges of your vision. When you reach the next door, the surface feels warm, as if it has been holding the day's sunlight long after the sun itself has slipped away. Inside, you find a room that smells faintly of old paper and dried lavender. There are shelves lining every wall, but instead of books, they hold small glass jars. Each jar is filled with something different: a button, a folded scrap of cloth, a tiny pebble smoothed by water. You don't remember collecting these, but you feel the weight of ownership all the same. The brain's gentle editor is always at work here, arranging details so they seem to fit. You pick up a jar containing a small silver key. Immediately, your mind offers you a story: a locked drawer in a desk you used to own, a drawer that held letters from someone far away. You can almost hear the paper rustle. Almost. But deep down, you know the key might never have been yours. It could have been from a photograph you saw once or a passing detail in a novel. Your mind has taken it, polished it, and placed it on this shelf as if it belonged here all along. Scientists studying memory reconsolidation have found that every time you recall something, your brain opens the memory to editing, not intentionally, but as part of the process. When the memory is restored, it may include details from your present environment, your mood, or even other unrelated memories that happen to be active at the same time. It's as if the librarian of your mind takes the book from the shelf, copies a few sentences from another story into it, and returns it without leaving a note. You wander deeper into the room, tracing your fingers along the cool glass. One jar contains a seashell, its spiral chipped at the tip. You remember holding it at a beach, listening for the echo of the sea, feeling the damp wind on your face. But then a strange unease threads through the memory. You have no clear image of the beach itself. No shoreline, no horizon, only the sensation of wind and the pressure of the shell against your ear. It's possible, you think, that the beach was never there at all. Maybe the sound of waves came from a recording played in a store, and your mind stitched it into another memory, one where you were standing by the ocean. There's something eerie about realizing you are the curator of a museum whose artifacts are constantly mislabeled, not out of malice, but because your mind wants the story to feel whole. And perhaps wholeness matters more than precision. In one jar, you notice a scrap of red fabric. You're certain it came from a shirt you used to wear, one that always felt too bright for you. You remember giving it away. But as you lift the jar, a flicker of doubt intrudes. Maybe it wasn't a shirt at all, but a scarf someone else wore in a photograph you loved. You find yourself unable to prove it either way. Researchers still wonder whether the brain's tendency to reshape memories is a flaw or a survival tool. Perhaps it protects you from details too sharp to hold, or fills in blanks so your personal story makes sense. You return the jar to its place and notice something new, a faint trail of disturbed dust along the shelf, leading toward a narrow wooden door at the back of the room. It's smaller than the others, just tall enough for you to pass through if you lower your head. The door isn't glowing, but there's a pull to it, as though some detail the gentle editor has been hiding is waiting behind it. The smell of lavender fades as you move toward it, replaced by something cooler, like air, just before a storm. You press your hand against the wood and feel the thrum of something unsaid on the other side. And then, without sound, the door begins to open. You lower your head and step through the small wooden doorway. The space beyond feels cooler, the air almost damp, as if it's been holding on to the breath of rain for hours without letting go. The first thing you notice is the light, not the warm glow of the last rooms, but a muted silver that seems to have no source. It falls across the floor in soft gradients, making shadows behave in ways you can't quite predict. Here, the shadows feel alive. They stretch and bend as you move, not always in the same direction as your body. You're reminded of times when you've remembered a scene, only to realize later that the lighting in your mind didn't match reality. A sunny afternoon recalled as cloudy. A dim room remembered as bright. Shadows from the wrong light. You walk forward and see an old wooden bench near the center of the room. It's familiar in a way you can't place, as though you've passed it in both dreams and waking life. When you sit down, the grain of the wood is warm against your palms, but the air around you is still cool. Scientists have long studied source misattribution, a term for when you remember a detail correctly, but recall it from the wrong context. The brain stores elements of a scene separately: color, sound, spatial arrangement, emotion. When those pieces are later reassembled, the lighting of one moment can be stitched into the memory of another, creating something subtly or entirely different. You remember once sitting on a bench just like this, with someone you cared for deeply. You can see the curve of their smile, hear the faint wind moving through leaves. But when you try to place it in time, something shifts. The clothes they're wearing belong to a year when you were living in another city. And the leaves overhead? You're sure they came from a park you visited months later, alone. Your shadow stretches toward the far wall, but there's no visible light source casting it. The sight is both beautiful and unsettling. You lean forward, resting your elbows on your knees, and the shadow shifts again, flowing like water to a different corner of the room. Perhaps the wrong light in a memory isn't always a mistake. Maybe your mind uses it to tell you how you felt rather than what was there. A cold moment dressed in warm light to soften it, or a joyful day remembered under cloud to keep you from lingering on it too much. You notice a painting on the wall, half in light and half in shadow. It shows a street you recognize instantly, though you've never stood there. You've dreamed it, perhaps, or seen a photograph and claimed it in some quiet, private way. The buildings in the light seem to hum with life. The ones in shadow are muted, their shapes blurred, as though the artist stopped caring halfway through. An eerie detail catches your eye. In the painted shadow, a figure stands still, watching, though you can't make out a face. The longer you look, the more you feel you've met them before, somewhere between truth and imagination. Researchers still wonder why the mind allows such inconsistencies to pass unnoticed until years later. Maybe the brain's goal isn't to preserve the raw footage of life, but to weave something more like a tapestry, true in feeling, if not in every thread. You rise from the bench and walk toward the wall where the painting hangs. As you get closer, the silver light in the room dims, and the shadowed parts of the painting grow deeper, almost liquid. You reach out, and for a moment, you swear your fingertips pass into that painted dark, as if the memory inside wants to pull you closer. When you pull your hand back, the air feels heavier. The bench behind you has shifted slightly, no longer facing the same direction. Across the room, another doorway waits, this one taller, wider, its frame carved with shapes you can't identify. They seem to move if you don't look directly at them, like thoughts shifting at the edge of recall. You step toward it slowly, your shadow flowing ahead of you, eager to see what comes next. You step through the tall carved doorway, the shapes on its frame rippling away like water disturbed by a passing hand. On the other side is a room with no walls you can see, only a soft haze that smells faintly of pine and cool earth, as if you've wandered into a forest after rain. The air carries a gentle hum, and as your eyes adjust, you see them, figures drifting in and out of the mist. At first, they seem like strangers, but then you start to recognize pieces of them. The tilt of a head that belonged to your childhood friend. The rhythm of footsteps that match someone you once passed on a crowded street. The way a hand moves, as if to tuck hair behind an ear, a gesture you've seen, though you can't say from whom. Borrowed faces, borrowed voices. One figure turns toward you, and for a moment you're certain you know them. Their smile is bright, familiar, but their eyes belong to someone else entirely. It's disorienting, like a dream where two people merge into one without explanation. Your mind does this more often than you think. Psychologists call it memory blending, when separate memories merge because they share a sensory detail, an emotional tone, or simply occupy the same mental shelf. The brain wants efficiency. It takes a piece from here, a piece from there, and stitches them together, creating a seamless character who never truly existed. You watch as two more figures pass in the mist, their faces shifting subtly with each step. One has the laugh of your neighbor, the other the posture of a teacher from long ago. You realize they are made entirely of borrowed parts, yet they feel no less real for it. An eerie detail catches your attention. A figure whose face is blank, but whose voice speaks a line you remember perfectly. A line someone once said to you under a sky full of migrating birds. You can almost hear the wing beats in the distance now. You walk closer, but the figure fades before you can reach them. The mist swirls in their place, carrying the faint scent of smoke. There's a strange comfort here, knowing that some of the people you carry in your mind are mosaics. Maybe they're not less valuable for it. Maybe they're more so. They are proof that your mind keeps the pieces that matter most, even if the whole changes shape. Still, researchers wonder how much of our social memory is fiction. Do we truly remember people, or only the way they made us feel? And if a memory of someone is mostly borrowed parts, is it still them? You pause, trying to recall a friend from years ago. You picture them clearly, the freckles across their nose, the sound of their voice in the cold morning air. But then you realize you've given them the smile of another friend and the hairstyle of someone you saw in a photograph only last month. Somewhere in the haze, you hear a faint chorus, voices talking at once, overlapping in gentle murmur. They are all familiar, yet not one of them belongs to a single whole person you can name. You step deeper into the mist, the ground beneath you shifting between grass and stone. Ahead, you see a faint light breaking through, revealing the outline of another doorway. This one is made of intertwined branches, their leaves trembling, though there is no wind. As you approach, a figure emerges from the mist and walks beside you. You don't recognize their face, but their presence feels like coming home. You think you could walk with them for a long time, even if you never learn their name. Together, you pass through the arch of branches. The arch of branches bends away behind you, sealing itself in silence, and you find yourself in a wide, open room bathed in golden light. The air feels warmer here, touched with the faint scent of baked bread and something sweeter, perhaps honey, perhaps memory itself trying to comfort you. You take a step forward, and the floor creaks softly, as though it remembers you. In the center of the room stands a long wooden table, worn smooth by countless meals. At one end sits a steaming cup of tea. You feel the warmth in your hands before you've even touched it, as if your body knows what it's like to hold it. The warmth of false certainty. You're sure you've been here before. You remember sitting at this table, tracing circles in the steam rising from the tea, speaking softly with someone across from you. The scene is vivid, the pattern of the tablecloth, the distant sound of rain against the window, the gentle tilt of their head as they listened. But a quiet shift begins. The tablecloth you see now is deep green, yet in another layer of memory, it was patterned with pale blue flowers. The rain might have been wind. The person across from you might not have been there at all. Scientists have studied this phenomenon, the confidence that a memory is real, even when it's wrong, and call it false memory with high certainty. Brain scans show that the same neural regions light up whether the memory is true or fabricated, which means feeling sure is not the same as being right. You sip the tea and it tastes of chamomile. You're certain that's correct until the aftertaste shifts and you think perhaps it's jasmine instead. The change is so slight that you could ignore it, but now you can't help wondering if you've ever really known which it was. A subtle, eerie detail draws your gaze to the far end of the table. There's a chair pulled out, angled slightly toward you, as if someone had just been sitting there. You can almost hear the whisper of their movement, though the seat is empty. You try to picture their face, but all that comes is the sensation they brought with them. The way your breathing slowed in their presence, the way the room seemed to grow steadier. Perhaps that is what your mind has chosen to keep, replacing the factual with the felt. You stand and walk to the window. Beyond the glass is a street you half recognize. Lamplight pooling on cobblestones, a cat darting across the way. You remember seeing this exact street from a different window years ago in another city. Or perhaps it was in a film you loved so much that you claimed the scene for yourself. Researchers still wonder if this false certainty is a byproduct of survival, a way to navigate life without constant doubt. Without it, perhaps every decision, every recollection would unravel before you could act on it. You turn back to the table, and now the cup of tea is gone. In its place is a small notebook, closed but still warm to the touch. You open it to find a single sentence written in your handwriting. You knew this before you remembered it. The words feel like both a comfort and a warning. You trace them slowly, then close the notebook and tuck it under your arm. The air in the room shifts, the golden light softening, folding inward, and a narrow hallway appears where there was only a blank wall before. The hallway is dim, its walls lined with frames that hold no pictures, only empty glass. You can see your reflection in each one as you pass, but it changes subtly. A different tilt of the head, a shadow across your cheek that wasn't there a moment ago. At the far end, a single door waits, painted in a shade of blue you're certain you've never seen before. Yet it feels like home. Imagine you are standing in a courtroom. The air smells faintly of polished wood and ink, and 100 eyes rest on a single person, an eyewitness. They are sworn in, hand trembling slightly, and then they begin to tell the story of what they saw. Every detail seems vivid. The color of the suspect's jacket, the shape of their face, the way they moved across the street. The jury leans forward. The witness's voice carries the conviction of someone who knows. They aren't hedging. They aren't uncertain. And yet, this is one of the most dangerous illusions in all of human cognition. Confidence is not accuracy. Psychologists have spent decades studying the reliability of eyewitness testimony, and the results are sobering. When a person recalls a memory, they don't pull it like a photograph from a file. They rebuild it, neuron by neuron, influenced by the fragments they still hold and by new information they have received since the event. This is called reconstructive memory. Now picture a witness who has seen a robbery. At first, they're unsure about what the thief's face looked like, but then perhaps they overhear someone else's description. Perhaps they see a photo in the newspaper. Their brain does something curious. It integrates this new information into the original memory, erasing the boundary between the two. By the time they take the stand, they're not lying. They're simply reporting a memory that has been edited without their awareness. You might think, well, at least the details that stand out, the most memorable ones, should be reliable. But here is the unsettling truth. The details you remember most vividly are often the ones most colored by emotion. Strong emotion can make a memory feel sharper, but it can also distort it, bending reality to fit the narrative your mind has chosen. There have been real cases where innocent people spent decades in prison, convicted almost entirely on confident eyewitness testimony, later overturned by DNA evidence. The witnesses weren't malicious. They were simply certain, and certainty feels like truth, even when it is not. This is one of the quiet tragedies of human memory. The brain's ability to tell a convincing story is not the same as its ability to tell a true one. And in the stillness of the courtroom, the jury hears the story, not the uncertainty behind it. So, as you drift further into thought, consider how much of your own life story, your own internal courtroom, is built on testimony from a witness who is you, but perhaps not the you that actually stood there in that moment. You've probably noticed that when you remember something, you don't just see it, you describe it to yourself. That running commentary in your mind, the quiet narrator in the background, is more than just a passive bystander. It's actively shaping the memory as it's being recalled. Psychologists call this verbal overshadowing. When you put a memory into words, whether in your head or out loud, you're translating a sensory experience into a linear, simplified form. But language is not a perfect match for reality. Words are like small boxes, and experiences are like sprawling shapes. To make the shape fit, you trim it, bend it, and sometimes lop off corners entirely. Imagine you're asked to recall the face of a man you met at a cafe last week. If you immediately start describing him, tall, brown hair, blue eyes, kind smile, you may actually make it harder to remember the details that fall outside your chosen words. His subtle cheekbone shape, the The particular way his hair curled over one ear, or the faint scar near his temple might vanish because they never made it into the linguistic package you chose. Later, when you try to picture him, you'll mostly remember the description, not the face itself. The same thing happens on a larger scale when groups discuss a shared event. Once someone offers a description, the car was red, others may adopt that version, even if they initially saw it as orange. The linguistic label starts to overwrite the visual memory. It's not malicious, it's just how the mind economizes. Words give the brain an easy-to-store reference point, and the messier original gets filed away or lost. Language is one of humanity's greatest tools, but it is also a filter. Each time we recall and retell, we're running our memories through that filter. The grainy, vivid texture of reality is slowly replaced with the neat, categorical world of words. Over years, a memory can transform from a rich sensory tapestry into a short sentence. I loved that summer, stripped of its smells, colors, and tiny incidental moments. This is why two people who lived the same story can later seem to be remembering entirely different tales. They've each been editing their versions for years, with language as both the chisel and the eraser. And if you try to go back to find the original stone beneath all that carving, you might discover that it's no longer there at all. There's something deeply human about storytelling. From the first cave paintings to bedtime tales, we've always tried to make sense of the world through narratives. But here's the twist. Your memory doesn't just store these stories. It writes them, edits them, and sometimes, without telling you, rewrites them entirely. Think about a time when you told a friend about something that happened years ago. A trip, a party, a conversation. Each time you've told that story, you've probably polished it, cut the boring parts, added emphasis where it makes people laugh, maybe even changed the order of events so it flows better. And the moment you do this, the improved version becomes the one your brain remembers. You overwrite the original, like saving a file with the same name. Psychologists call this narrative smoothing, the tendency to alter memories so they fit neatly into a coherent story. Your brain doesn't like loose ends, contradictions, or awkward details. It wants meaning. It wants arcs. And so every time you revisit a memory, your mind becomes less of an archivist and more of a novelist. And here's the stranger part. Sometimes you're both the author and the audience. You believe your own rewrites without question. That's why you can be utterly convinced you've always remembered it that way. You're not lying. You're just inhabiting a version of the truth your brain has carefully crafted over time. The consequence? Your past is less like a fixed book and more like a living document, updated, redacted, and sometimes entirely reimagined. The story of you is a collaboration between what happened, what you wanted to happen, and what you've told yourself so many times it feels like it happened. And the more you think about this, the more unsettling it becomes. If every memory is a story, and every story is shaped by the teller, then who are you really if the teller and the listener are both you? In the dim glow of your mind's library, a strange truth begins to emerge. Memory does not record reality like a camera. It composes it. More like a novelist who cares for plot and theme rather than perfect accuracy. When you recall an event, you are not retrieving an untouched film reel. You are reading the last draft you wrote the last time you remembered it. Each telling is an act of gentle editing, a tweak here, a flourish there, sometimes a missing page quietly rewritten to suit the emotional arc. Neuroscientists call this reconsolidation. Each recall reopens the memory file, makes it editable, and then saves it anew, but with subtle alterations. Over years, these edits accumulate. The park bench in your memory may have been green, but you've always liked the look of deep oak brown, so now it is brown. The friend's voice may have had a sharper laugh, but in your retelling, it softens. It's not deceit. It's the mind's instinct to weave events into something that feels coherent, meaningful, and aligned with the story you want to tell yourself about your life. This is why two people can stand in the same place, experience the same event, and yet carry away entirely different recollections. One remembers the rain as oppressive, the other as romantic. The brain does not care as much about what happened as it does about what it meant. This is why memories survive not in sharp lines and pixels, but in moods, textures, and half-remembered smells. And there's a quiet comfort in this. The fact that your memory is a storyteller means you are not chained to the exact weight of the past. Your mind is an artist painting over the cracks in the wall, keeping the shapes of your life beautiful enough to carry forward. In a way, this narrative instinct is part of your survival. The soft brush that turns even jagged edges into something you can live with, something that will let you sleep tonight. History books like to pretend they are neat, tidy containers of the past, each page a faithful reproduction of reality. But you begin to suspect that history is less a pristine museum and more a giant attic, dimly lit, dusty, cluttered with objects whose labels have faded or been replaced entirely. The same cognitive quirks that bend personal memory also warp the collective memory of entire societies. You think of the Mandela effect, where groups of people remember something that never happened, like a movie line slightly misquoted, or an event that never actually took place. It sounds absurd until you realize this happens at scale in history. Battles remembered as victories when they were stalemates. Speeches retrofitted with words never spoken. Entire movements distilled into the faces of leaders who were barely involved. Part of the distortion comes from the same mental economy that edits your own life story, simplifying, compressing, removing messy contradictions. But there's also intent. Nations, ideologies, religions, any large collective with a story to tell will consciously sculpt memory into a shape that flatters them. They prune inconvenient facts, reframe humiliations, magnify their own nobility. It's not just propaganda, it's memory gardening. And once that version takes root, people will defend it as if it were their own lived experience. Even eyewitnesses aren't immune. You recall studies showing that witnesses to the same event, say a protest, describe entirely different versions of what happened, influenced by their prior beliefs. Memory isn't a camera. It's more like a watercolor painting that runs and blurs the moment you touch it. And other people's brushes can leave marks you'll swear were always there. You wonder how many moments in the history you were taught are, in reality, composites, stitched together from hearsay, misinterpretations, and outright fabrications. And then a quieter, more unsettling thought creeps in. You are part of this process. Every time you pass along a story, even one you believe to be true, you risk nudging it a fraction of an inch away from reality. And over decades, those inches turn into miles. It feels strange, almost vertigo-inducing, to realize that the past is not a fixed landscape you can visit at will, but a shifting terrain, constantly redrawn by the fallible minds of those who claim to remember it. You sense that in this fragile weave of recollections, both personal and collective, truth is less a fixed point and more a flicker in the dark. There is a strange kindness in the way your memory sometimes lies to you. It is not always malicious, not always meant to distort. Sometimes it acts like a careful friend editing an old photograph, softening the harsh shadows, blurring the unsightly edges, brightening the colors just enough to make the past look gentler than it was. You think of the summers of your childhood, perhaps. The grass seemed greener, the skies impossibly blue, the days felt endless, but not in the slow, dragging way you now know as an adult. No, those days were elastic in a way that only children's days are. And yet, if you were to examine the actual weather records from those years, you might find rain more often than sun, cloudy skies more often than clear. But your memory has a way of giving you a gift, removing the ordinary, the dull, the unpleasant, until what remains feels almost magical. Psychologists call this the positivity bias. It's the tendency for older memories, especially, to shed their darker tones and preserve only the pleasant parts. This bias becomes stronger as we age, perhaps as a coping mechanism, a way of carrying the past without letting it weigh too much on the present. And in that sense, a false memory can be a kind of placebo. It doesn't cure the reality of what happened, but it can soften the pain of it, allowing you to live with a version that's easier to carry. Of course, the opposite can happen too. Sometimes a single hurtful moment grows teeth in your mind, chewing its way into other memories, staining them with its bitterness until you remember entire months as darker than they truly were. This is the negativity bias, the cruel sibling of the positivity bias. The strange part is that neither of these are true in any absolute sense. They're not historical records. They're emotional narratives. And the line between those two is the same line between a photograph and a painting. One claims objectivity, the other embraces interpretation. You begin to realize that your memories are not just passive recordings. They are active negotiations. They are constantly being revised, like an old manuscript passed through countless hands, each reader leaving small edits in the margins. Some edits are kind, some are cruel, but all of them become part of the story you tell yourself about who you were, and therefore who you are now. And perhaps the most unsettling realization is this: you have been the editor too. You have chosen, consciously or not, what to emphasize, what to minimize, and what to erase entirely. The question you're left with is not, are my memories accurate, but rather, do I believe the version I've chosen to keep? You breathe slowly, as though each inhale were a thread pulling you deeper into the quiet. The topic turns now gently toward the part of memory most people try to resist, the slow fading. We like to imagine our minds as vaults, where treasures are stored, polished, and kept forever. But in truth, your mind is more like a vast garden, where some plants are carefully tended while others, neglected or deemed less useful, wither away under the soft erosion of time. This forgetting is not always a failure. In fact, neuroscientists often call it a feature, not a flaw. Without it, your thoughts would be an overgrown jungle, tangled, impenetrable, and exhausting. The pruning of memory keeps the paths clear. Imagine if you remembered every tiny movement of your fingers this morning, every flicker of shadow across the wall, every random number you glanced at. The important would drown in the trivial. In the hippocampus, your brain's memory librarian, forgetting can be as deliberate as remembering. Some neurons simply stop firing together, their bond dissolving like salt in water. Other times, memories remain, but are locked behind doors you don't even know exist. And sometimes, the memory is overwritten, gently replaced with something newer, fresher, more relevant. Like painting over an old canvas with a new scene, some of the original strokes still hiding beneath. Here's the tender secret. Letting go of certain memories makes space for you to live more fully now. The ache of an old heartbreak becomes softer, not because it's erased, but because the mind knows you have learned enough from it. The sharp sting of a failure dulls, leaving only the quiet wisdom it gave you. Even nature follows this rhythm. Trees shed their leaves to survive winter. The ocean swallows the footprints in the sand. Your mind, too, surrenders the old to make way for the new. You might notice that forgetting often feels like healing, even if you never consciously chose it. As you listen, you might picture your own mind, the winding pathways, the places where light filters through, the gentle shadows where certain memories sleep. Some will wake when called, others will rest forever. Both are part of the design. And as this thought settles, so does your body. The muscles in your face loosen. Your eyelids are heavy but curious, still following the soft current of words. Somewhere, in the quiet architecture of your brain, another small pruning is already happening, and you don't even need to notice it for it to work. You might think of memory as something belonging only to the past, but it reaches forward, shaping the person you are becoming. Every story you tell about yourself, every decision you make, every plan you form, these are stitched together by the thread of memory. But when that thread is frayed or woven with false strands, your future can bend in subtle, invisible ways. Consider the stories you repeat about your own life. Maybe you always tell friends about the time you triumphed against impossible odds, or the time you were wronged, or the time you made a terrible mistake. With each retelling, the edges blur. A detail is softened here, exaggerated there. Soon, you may be responding more to the version you've been telling than to what actually happened. In a sense, you become a character in your own mythology. Someone just slightly different from the you who lived the moment. This isn't necessarily bad. It's part of what makes humans creative and adaptable. But it can also lock you into patterns. If your memories reinforce a belief that you are unlucky, or not good at relationships, or destined for disappointment, your brain will filter new experiences through that lens. The past, whether accurately remembered or not, becomes the scaffolding for your future choices. Here's the unsettling part. Research shows that even memories you've never recalled aloud can shift just because you think about them. The simple act of retrieval is like taking a glass figurine off a shelf. Each time you handle it, tiny chips flake off or a new scratch appears. Over time, the figurine changes shape, not because you meant to alter it, but because you simply touched it. And there's another twist. The future can influence the past. If something happens tomorrow that deeply changes how you see the world, a betrayal, a sudden windfall, a life-altering event, your mind may rewrite certain memories to make them align with your new reality. That means your understanding of what happened years ago can shift overnight. This is why memory feels so slippery, so ghost-like. It's not just that your brain is imperfect. It's that your memories are alive, constantly growing and shrinking, mutating under the pressure of the present moment. You're not a fixed archive. You're a storyteller, forever revising the script. And perhaps the most haunting part is this. The person you will be in the future will remember you, this moment, differently than you do right now. And there's nothing you can do to stop it. By now, you've traveled with your own mind through the dim and winding corridors of memory, touching both the reliable and the treacherous corners. You've seen how each recollection is less a preserved artifact and more a living, breathing painting, always susceptible to new strokes, new shades, or even entire figures appearing where none existed before. And here, at the edge of this long, slow journey, we encounter a paradox. Forgetting, the very thing we fear, might be the most merciful function your brain has. Because forgetting is not simply the loss of data, it is the pruning of noise. Without it, your inner world would be overgrown, a chaotic garden choked by every detail, every moment, every mundane hour, all clamoring for equal attention. You would drown in a sea of the irrelevant. Forgetting, paradoxically, lets you remember better. It is the mind's quiet curator, keeping only the pieces that seem, for now, essential. A face that once meant everything may fade, but the kindness they gave you might remain as a wordless warmth. The sound of your childhood street may vanish, but the way it felt to run barefoot under a summer sky might still live, as vivid as the day it happened. Sometimes the distortion of memory isn't a flaw, but a gift. A story you tell yourself, even if it bends the facts, might be the scaffolding that holds up your sense of self. If the exact truth of the past were unshakable, you might find yourself trapped inside moments you wish to outgrow. But with this gentle flexibility, you can reshape what has hurt you, soften what was too sharp, and sometimes unknowingly craft a past that is kinder than it really was. So, as you lie here, letting the dim hum of the night cradle you towards sleep, remember this. Your mind is not a perfect recorder, and it is not meant to be. It is a poet, a painter, a dreamer, making choices about what to keep, what to shade over, and what to let drift away like mist over a morning field. And tomorrow, when you open your eyes, you will carry forward not the whole of everything that has ever been, but a selection, enough to know who you are, enough to guide you forward, enough to live. And now you are here, not in the past, not in the memories we've wandered through together, but in the soft, hazy moment that follows a long journey. The corridors of your mind feel quieter now. The portraits of false memories, once vivid and alive, have dimmed like paintings at dusk. Their colors still linger, faint and warm, but their edges are blurred, melting gently into the fog. You feel no rush to remember them correctly anymore. You realize, perhaps, they were never meant to be perfect. Memories are not photographs. They are more like autumn leaves drifting on a slow river, changing shape, tumbling in the current, reflecting the light in different ways depending on where you stand. As you breathe in, you feel a soft looseness in your chest, a release, as if you've been holding a handful of water all your life, and now, finally, you've let it flow back to the stream. It is all right to forget. It is all right to remember differently. Because you are not a recording device. You are a living being. And living things do not keep the past in perfect jars. They let it evolve. They let it change. Far away in that quiet mental archive you've been walking through, a single door closes with a gentle click. Not locked, just closed for now. The echo of your footsteps fades. You are weightless. Your breathing is deep. Your mind drifts slowly toward the dark, quiet ocean of sleep. In this place, there is no urgency, no tests to pass, no names to recall. Only the slow rhythm of your heart, the warmth of your body, and the soft awareness that even if the details fade, you are still here, still whole, still enough. The memory of this journey will live in you, not as perfect words, but as a feeling. And perhaps when you dream tonight, you'll walk these halls again. Only this time, you won't be searching for accuracy. You'll simply be wandering. and that will be enough.